All right, we just finished the pastoral epistles, First and Second Timothy and Titus. Today we're going to do a Father's Day message. And if those who are outsiders, you probably say, "Oh, well, that would make sense." And for those inside the church, you'd say, "Oh, he's going to do one on the holiday this time," because I don't always do that. But I just felt led to. One of the reasons I did, I just feel like fathers are one of the most underappreciated entities in our culture today. I think as men, I'm not feeling unappreciated. I feel like God has put me in a family and with people that really appreciate what I've done as a father. But I believe as a culture, we're getting away from appreciating fatherhood. So my message, the first thing I asked was, why do we honor fathers on Father's Day? Why do we have a day set aside to honor fathers? And why would a nation honor men? Why would people in the church, why as Christians, why do we honor fathers? Well, I think it goes back to the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 27 and 8. It says, God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he created him, male and female. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the ground. And then down in chapter 2, we go to starting with verse 20. It said, so man gave name to all the livestock and the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, but for Adam no suitable helper was found. So the Lord caused man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the men's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made the woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, now this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, and she shall be called woman. And for this reason a man will leave his father and his mother and will be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. So this is God's plan. It's God's plan to have fathers and mothers in society. God was the one who came up with the plan. We may have other plans, but God has a plan. And his plan is that we have fathers and we have mothers. And of course, that plan works really well because when a father and a mother come together, they have children, correct? Generally. Now we know there are people who are unhealthy or for one reason or another are not able to have children, and that's understandable. But in the general case, when a man and a woman come together, they have children. And so it seems to be working pretty well because he started it, at least according to Scripture, around 6,000 years ago. And it seems to be working because we have about 8 billion people on the face of the earth. So we seem to be multiplying quite well. And especially when you consider, at one point he took the earth from millions of people to 8 and started over. And we're back up to 8 million. So it's this plan he had seems to be working pretty good. At least physically, in the physical aspect. And then in Matthew 19 verses 4 to 6, if you look at that, it basically says identical to what is written in Genesis. But Jesus was being confronted about divorce, and he said, is it right for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? And he said, no. That's not what God had intended. Even though Moses said you could give your wife a certificate of divorce, he did it because of the hardness of our hearts. That wasn't God's original plan. Now, does that mean he can't redeem a marriage that's been divorced and remarried? Sure he can. My dad was divorced and remarried, and I was came out of that marriage. So I like to think there was some redemption in that. I like to think there's some redemption. I think God can redeem things that are broken. You know, that's what he does. He takes broken things and turns them around for good. But that doesn't mean that they're good. You know, it means that he had to take something that was broken and fix it. But it's okay. You know, I'm not offended. You know, I'm not hurt by the fact that God said that that was a sin. And I don't think you should be either. You know, we have to look at what because his plan is perfect. Our execution, not so much, right? Yeah. So let's go into Exodus. Let's go to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. I'm glad I went through my notes this morning because I had written down Exodus 12:20 and not 20:12. But we want 20:12. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord is giving you. All right, honor your father and mother. Well, that sounds like a good reason to honor your father, maybe at least once a year, right? So there's another reason we can honor. It says honor our father. And of course that should be the bare minimum is one day a year, right? Should be like 365 days a year that we honor our fathers. Once again, you know, this is God's plan. Now, did we execute his plan perfectly? Are all fathers living in a way that they deserve honor? No. My dad was, you know, not a perfect father. He was a good man. He was a Christian. He loved the Lord, and he led me to, you know, he pointed me in the right direction. And I was able to find Christ based on from his example. And you know, even though it was flawed, even though it was broken, I could see God working in his life. And so don't feel bad as a parent. You know, this is a good point, a good place to make this point. If you're a parent and you say, well, I know I shouldn't have done this and I shouldn't have done that, that's okay to see that, but don't stay there. Don't dwell on that and say, what you need to do is, if once you realize you shouldn't have done something, what do? Stop doing it. You don't go back, because you can't go back, right? Can you ever go back and undo what you did? No. You can only go forward. You can only move forward. I remember the movie about Bart Miller. You know, it's about how his dad was broken. And he wasn't a very good father. I know and at least his image of his father was terrible. You know, he seemed like to him his father was abusive and terrible. And yet, he came to Jesus before he died. And he changed. And you know what? If your father's alive, no matter how evil he is today, be praying. Because there's always hope. As long as there's breath, there's hope. You know, if your father wasn't godly and he died, what do we know about that? We don't know anything. Only God knows what happens to them. You know, only God can judge. You know, yeah, I can see the evidence and I can see the fruit, but only God knows for sure what he had to do. You know, I can't see a person's heart. I can only see the fruit. I can judge their fruit and say, if I were to look at that person, I don't think they're in heaven. But that doesn't mean I see everything right. So I can't judge. Even if they never turn around. We have to let that in God's hand. We ultimately have to leave that in God's hand. But we still have to honor our father. We have to find a way to honor our father, even in their fault. Why? When I was in the military, they told me that you salute a second lieutenant not because he's deserving of honor, but because he is an officer. And you salute his position. You don't salute him as a person. You know, if you know anything about the military, a second lieutenant is at the bottom of the ladder on the officers' court. He just got out of officers training, and he's, sometimes even like first lieutenants just got out of training. But we still had to salute him as an airman. I had to salute him. Why? Because he was an officer. And that's what his position deserved, that respect. Because he was in a position of respect. In the military, they teach you to answer, you do what you're told. And you say, what? And there's a reason for that. When you're in battle and the guy says duck, you don't say why. You know why? Because it might be too late if by the time you say why. Because it might be boom, and then you're dead. Okay? So we're in a battle. Spiritually, we're in a battle. So when God speaks, we got to learn to listen. We got to respond to God's commands. He's not telling us, he's not commanding us things to take away our fun or to hurt us. He puts these boundaries up to protect us. It says, honor your mother and father that your life might be long in the land you live. Now this was a specific command to the Israelites, but there's an application to us today. We're still supposed to honor our mother and father. And there's still a blessing with that. Why? Because if you learn to honor your mother and father, if you learn to obey your mother and father, as you grow, what happens? You go to school and you learn to honor your teacher. And when you get to, and you're out on the streets, you honor the police. And when you're out on the, you honor the government authorities. Why? And what happens? It keeps you out of trouble, right? It keeps you out of trouble. You learn to do the right thing, and things get better. When you look, if you don't honor your father, what happens? Then you begin to rebel against authority. And that, we begin to see that. In the 1960s, we began to rebel against all authority. And guess what? You sow the wind and you reap a whirlwind. We're starting to see that in some ways. Things that if you just think, I can't imagine anyone thinking this is normal or this is right, but that they claim that they do. They've been lied to. They've been deceived. Right? I mean, I can't imagine anybody in their right mind saying some of the things that we're saying are normal and healthy and right. Or right. I mean, my mind is just twisted when I listen to people that are talking about these things. I just go, how can you come up with this? It doesn't, there's nowhere in Scripture does it make sense. Nowhere in norma and reality does it make sense. But yet we say it's okay. It's normal. No, it's not. God has a plan. He has a way. Now, is it going to be, are we going to live according to this way perfectly? Of course not. But we have to understand that His way is right and our way is wrong. Some people say, well, I have these, tendencies. Yeah, you do. But that doesn't make them right. When I was a little kid, when I was young, I had quite a temper. And I can remember my brothers and sisters telling my wife, watch, be careful, because he's got quite a temper. And you know what? We've been married 37 years, and you know what she tells my brothers and sisters? They go, who, what? Why? Is it because I don't still have a temper? No, it's because I haven't let my temper control me. I can't let my sinful nature control me. We have to know what sin is, and then let it, and then say, okay, it's sinful. This is what God calls sin, and yes, I might have a tendency towards that sin, but I can't let that sin control me. I got to let the Spirit of God control me. If I don't, then I'm going to get off the path. I'm going to get messed up. All right, so like I said, this is the beginning of the plan. But I want to show you some other things. And some of this, you'll say, well, this is about the wife and the husband. Well, there's application, and I want you to see it. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25 to begin with. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. And I'm just going to stop with that part, because we're going to go into the rest of it in the next point. But it says, husbands, love your wife. I think one of the most important things we can do as fathers, even though we fall short of God's glory, even though we're not perfect, one of the most important things that we can do is we can love our wives. That's one of the most important things you can do for your children, is love your wife. You say, what? Well, yeah. Because if you want your children to know how to love their spouse, how are they going to know? They're going to know by what you do. They're going to follow your example. I remember somebody telling me if you see somebody, you say you're in love, you look at your mother, and then you say, is that what you're going to be like in 50 years? Is that what you want? And there's some truth in that. Why? Because we follow the example of our parents. We follow the example of our parents. And so it's important that we love our spouse as men. And we're talking Father's Day here. So we're dealing with fathers, But, of course, there's application for wives. That means wives should love their husband, right? Usually that's not as big a problem, but in our society, with things the way they're turned upside down and twisted, sometimes it is. And that's always been the case. If you go through the history, if you read the Old Testament, there have been problems in the Old Testament as well. It's not just the New Testament. It's not just today where society is messed up. The world has been messed up from the time that Adam and Eve were in the garden, and Eve said, hey, this looks good. Why don't we have some? Right? And Adam said, yeah, it's a good idea. Let's try it. After God said, don't do it. Ever since then, we've been having problems. So we're not in a perfect world, and we know that. And the only hope is Jesus. Our only hope is Jesus. But we still want to do the right thing. Why? Because the right thing is the right thing, right? We don't do the right thing because it's going to get us to heaven. We do the right thing because we love Jesus, and he said it's right, so we want to do it. And usually what he has in store for us is better. So we love our spouse. And of course, we apply that. We can apply that even further. We want to love our children. We want to love our children. And when I say these things, don't picture love the way the world teaches love. If you see love as always doing nice things for somebody, that's not love. It isn't love. If you read, I wasn't going here, but I am. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And I'm going there because I think love, you have to know what love is. It says love is patient and love is kind. So then we like that. And it says does not envy, it does not boast. It is not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrong. It does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. It protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, it always perseveres, it never fails. Love, it protects. Sometimes it has to make, we have to be firm. We protect our kids, we protect our spouse. And sometimes to do that, we have to be firm, and that's not easy. It's easier just to say, oh, go do what you want, especially with our children. To go do what you want, go watch some TV while I take care of the house or whatever. Let the television babysit. Let the computer babysit. It's easier to let them do it than do what God commanded us to do in Deuteronomy for fathers to teach their children. It's a lot easier for us to do what society says and let somebody else teach your kids. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you can't send your kids to school. I think that's okay. But ultimately, it's not the school's responsibility to teach your children. It's your responsibility. If you have good schools and you're confident in their ability to teach your children, there's no problem sending them there. But now if you feel like those schools are not teaching your children godly values, I think it's time to get your kids out of that school. I mean, and that you just have to decide. You have to decide. And everybody, it may fall, some people may say, oh, this school's no good, I would never send my kids. Other people will say, oh, it's a good school, I'm going to send my kids there. But you ultimately have to decide, because who's responsible for your children? You are. Who's responsible, so we have to love. And, love is patient, love is kind, does not envy. But there's a lot more to love than just being nice and pretty. It's not all about sending flowers and chocolate, even though that's a healthy, good thing to do as well, to love our children. All right, Ephesians 5:25 through 27, and I want to look at that because I think all right, get to the right chapter and verse here. 25 to 27. I know you said we just read 25. Part of it. Christ loved just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing of the water with the word, and to present her to himself with a radiant church without stain or wrinkle and any other blemishes, but holy and blameless. All right, so Jesus is our example as how to love. I mean, his love is not doing what everybody wants, doing what your children want, but doing what's best for their children. Sometimes, we want, people say, well, if I were God, I would have done this. You ever hear anybody say that? Somebody say, now, if I was God, this is how I would have done it. But the problem is what? I'm not God. If I was God. If, the Satan, what was he said? Did God not say? That's what he said in the garden. He said to Eve, he said, God, he was trying to twist what God said, right? He tried to twist what God said. And you know what? When we say, well, if I was God, what are we doing? We're listening to the enemy. He's trying to twist what God would do. We're thinking we know better than God what's right. Well, sometimes, have you ever asked your children to do something and they looked at you like, why? Or, I'm not doing that. Of course, everyone has. But as parents, why do we ask them to do those things? Why do we ask them to clean their room? Is it because we don't want to clean their room? Or is it because someday they're going to have a house and they're going to have to clean their house? And if they don't clean the room, guess what? When you go to their house, yeah, exactly. I'm going to be quiet when I talk about that because I could have some things I could say, but I won't. It's important to admit, I'm the first to admit I'm not the best at cleaning house. I like to let things go until they get so bad I can't stand it, and then I clean it all up and make it really pretty. And then my wife says, why didn't you just do this a couple times? I mean, you could have done it. Instead of taking 10 hours to do it, you could have done a little bit here, a little bit there. I wait until it takes 10 hours, and then I do 10 hours worth of work, or whatever. It's just my nature. But, as a parent, part of that comes from the fact that when I was a child, my parents didn't say, you need to go clean your room. They didn't teach me. They didn't teach me. With our kids, we said, okay, you clean your room, you clean your room, you clean this part of the house, you clean this part of the house. As adults, we'll do this. It gave everybody responsibilities. Why? Because guess what? When you get up, when you get to be an adult, you're going to have responsibility. I have another point a little bit later, but, we were talking about 1 Timothy. In 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus, we were talking about mentoring. Well, guess what? Who's the first mentor of every child? The mothers and fathers. So mothers and fathers are mentoring, they're teaching. And of course, if you tell your kids, now go clean your room, and then they come out in the house and it's a mess, or your bedroom's a mess, guess what they're going to do? They might clean their room, but they're not going to hear what you're saying because they see what they're seeing. So we need to not only say something, we need to do something. It's a, you show me your faith without works, I'll show you my faith by what I do. Right? That's what James said. I mean, faith changes things. And like I said, this seems hard. I don't know why it didn't seem like this when I was studying it, but it's coming across that way when I present it. But I want you to know, God is your Father and He loves you. And we're going to get to this verse here, and I think it's very important. Hebrews 12, verse 6 through 11. And I think this is kind of a thing in culture that we've just lost. I think this is something we've just really lost. And I think it goes along why it seems so difficult. We might even start with verse 5. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline. Do not lose heart when He rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines those He loves. He punishes everyone He accepts as a son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as a son. For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone is undergoes discipline, you are an illegitimate children, not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who discipline us, and we respect them for that. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirit and live? And I'm going to stop there, but I wanted you to see God is a loving Father. And earthly fathers should be loving fathers who discipline their children. That doesn't mean you abuse your children. There's a big difference. Discipline is getting your children to learn to have self-control, to do the things they need to do. Sometimes that requires corporal or punishment. But normally, discipline is about getting children to learn to do the right things. And you know what? We have a hard time, adults of my generation, we have a hard time teaching this because we didn't learn it. I'll be honest, we didn't learn it. We weren't taught self-discipline. Oh, we don't need all those rules. We do need those rules. Now, don't get me wrong, we're never going to keep them all. We're never going to get them all right. But we ought to at least know what they are. We ought to know what the boundaries are. Why? Because if we don't know where the boundaries are, we're going to keep running off a cliff, and we're going to keep falling down, and we're going to keep getting hurt. And we're going to say, why does this keep happening to me? Why does God let me do this? Because He gives us choices. He shows us the boundaries and says, now don't go there. And then we go there and we blame it on God. Right? How many times do people say, have you heard somebody say, well, why did God ever let me do this? Well, He said it was wrong. He said don't do it. And you're doing it anyways. Don't blame God. He gave you the rules and you're ignoring them. Now, if you live in, I get an app that's every day that says unreached people groups and gives me these people, sometimes there are hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of people who haven't heard an adequate teaching of God's Word. If you're there, okay, that's different. But we're not there. We're here. How many of you have no access to a Bible? I have some in the back in my office if you need one. The Bible's here. It's not a rule book, but God does set up boundaries for us to protect us. The law was never given to us to keep us, to make us right. The law was given to protect us from the harm we were doing to ourselves. That's what the law was given for. Because, you know, the Israelites, when they came out of slavery, what? They didn't know how to live as free people. So God gave them some boundaries so they would know how to live as free people. Did they get it right? No, of course they didn't. You know, God's given us boundaries. Are we always getting them right? No. But as fathers, we need to know the rules. We need to know the boundary so that we can teach our children some discipline, self-control. If you get a chance, there's he's the head of the University of Texas system, and he's a Navy admiral, and he says he has 10 rules for life that he learned from being a Navy SEAL. And he said the first one is making your bed every morning. And I remember when I heard that, and I thought, what's that got to do with anything? But then if you listen to his whole speech, it really makes sense. It's talking about discipline. If you do something first thing in the morning, if you do something and you have a victory first thing in the morning, guess what? Your day continues victoriously. You begin to have you accomplish one thing. He says, if you don't accomplish anything else, at least when you go to bed, you've accomplished one thing. You know? And there's truth in that. You know? Like I said, it's not in the Bible, you got to get up and make your bed every morning. But you need to learn discipline. We need to learn to take care of ourselves. If we don't take care of ourselves, how are we going to help anybody else? We want to help everybody. I mean, this is probably more of a problem with ladies than men. They love to help people. They just have it in their heart to help people. But yet, when they're not in a position where they got everything together, and so they try to help somebody else. And this other person, instead of helping that other person, this other person drags them down, puts them in a worse position. And then they had 3 kids and 3 different men that they tried to help, and they weren't able to help them. And next thing you know, they got 3 kids by 3 different guys, and nobody wants to pay child support. And they're like, why is all these bad? Well, you got to get yourself in the right position. Get yourself in the right position and have a confidence to know that that guy isn't the right guy for me. You know, yes. And sometimes you're into that situation. Well, guess what? You know, if you're in that situation, let's make the best of it. You know, God can redeem even, you know, like I said, God's a redeemer. He can redeem things, which means he can make them better. He can take something that's broken and restore it. He's in the business of restoration. But it's better to obey than sacrifice. In other words, it's better to get it right the first time than to have it fixed. Like I said, we all know we're in that position where we need to have it fixed. So let's move forward, right? Let's go forward from here. Let's do the right thing from today. We're not going to be able to go back. As I'm pointing that stuff out, you're probably all beating yourself up and saying, well, guess what? I beat myself up before I preached this message, okay? You know, me and my wife were praying last night, and there were some things that I really had to work through. You know? I had to really work through before I could preach this message. So don't feel like I'm throwing stones at you. We all make mistakes. But I want you to see the standard, because if you have, you know, I've said this I don't know how many times, but it's God's way is he marks the mark, and then we aim for the mark. The way we live today is we shoot the arrow, and then we draw the bullseye around it. And we say, I hit the mark. And you say, what do you mean? You say, you do what you want to do, and you say, that's the right way. You do what you want to do, and then you say, that's the right way. And then you can't miss the mark, can you? If you're doing what you want to do, you can say whatever way you go is the right way. Well, that's what we're doing right now. Well, when you got 8 billion people all saying we're going to do what we want to do, and they're all putting their targets wherever they want to put them, we're going to have chaos. And guess what we have? Chaos. If you want order, There's only one way we're going to get order. It's when we start all aiming for the mark. Like I said, we don't have to, we may never hit the mark every day, but at least we need to be aiming for that mark. We need to love God. You know, God is gracious. He loves us so much. But I just see so much where today people are just like, whatever, it doesn't matter. No, there's a right and there's a wrong. Let's aim for the right. And let's be honest when we miss. And, you know, as parents, that's one of the things as parents we need to do. You know, when you mess up as a parent, you know, we're supposed to be good examples to our children, right? We say, you know what, I really messed up there. I shouldn't have got mad at you and yelled and screamed like that. Because that's not good. That didn't solve anything. It just made me feel better for a few seconds. Now it makes me feel bad. So it's okay to apologize. And why? Because if you can apologize, guess what? Your kids will learn it's okay to apologize. But if you never apologize, do you think they're ever going to apologize? Of course not. I didn't do anything wrong. Just suck it up and deal with it, kid. No. We make mistakes and we need to be honest with our kids. And we do that. All right. That's how we can be a good father. All right. And then the last one I want to read. This is a good one to end with. Let's go to Joshua 1. Joshua 1. I guess I missed one, but that's right. I feel like we need to go here now. Because I think this is where we have Joshua 1. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers and to give them. All right. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the laws of my servant Moses, who gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful in wherever you go. Do not let the book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. The Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. All right. And the last thing we should do as good fathers, you know, besides setting an example and loving our spouses and also being servant leaders, the last thing we ought to do is we need to encourage our children. One of the things I studied the word encouragement, and the word encouragement, encourage means to give courage. It means to give courage. So, what is our job as parents? To give courage. Here, Joshua, this Joshua chapter 1, Moses just died. He just took over for Moses. He's getting ready to lead the Israelites, a band of set-free captives, into a promised land that God has promised to give them. And all of a sudden, he's going from being Moses' assistant to be the man in charge. And what does God say? Be of good courage. You know, have I not said, be of good courage? Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you. As parents, that's our job, is to give our children courage to do what they're called to do, to give them the strength to do what they need to do in their life, right? It's important that as fathers, especially fathers, because mothers tend to want to hug their kids and hang on to their kids and love them until they're 99, you know. But as fathers, we know if we're ever going to get any time alone with our wives, we need to get the kids going up and out of the house, right?
There you go.
Oh, not that that's our only motive, but, you know. But God uses our selfish motives to get us in the right place, you know. And balance, you know, he uses that nurturing mother who wants to hang on forever and that father who wants to push them out of the house as soon as they're ready, as soon as it's possible, to balance each other. And so we need to balance each other. But we have to remember our goal as parents is what? To raise our children. As fathers. How many of us are going to live forever? And I'm not talking about going to heaven and living forever there. But how many people are going to be here for our kids forever? That's what I mean. How many of us can be there for our kids for the rest of their lives? How many of us can do that? I don't see any hands. I don't see any hands. Okay. So that's important to remember when you're raising your children. Because you can't be there for them. You can't be there with them forever. Now God could be there with us forever, but He, for some reason, chose to do it this way. He gave us the ability to have freedom. You know, we're not always bound with Jesus, right? We're not always right with God. He gives us some ebb and flow. And that's the way it should be with our children. You know, I want my kids to come home, but I don't necessarily want them to live at home, right? I want them to feel like they can come home. My daughter went through a tough time and she came home and lived with us. And I was glad she did. But I was glad when she was ready to get out and live on her own too. You know, it's okay. That's healthy. That's normal. It's you know, as fathers, we want to encourage our kids to do what they were called to do. Because when we hang on to them forever, guess what? They can't do what they are called to do. They're called to, you know, some people's kids are called to go to Africa. Right? Some people's kids are called to go to third world countries. I got a buddy who spent the last 35, 40 years of his life going back and forth to China. He lived in Taiwan and then he'd go in and out of China doing business. And he was doing business all right. And you know, I want you to know, God wants to do the same thing for you. He has a plan for you. It may not be to go to China. It may not be to go to Russia. It may not be to go to Mexico. It may be to go to Walmart and work like my daughter, or maybe to go to New Jersey and work like my son. I don't know. But if I hang on to them and squeeze them too tight, they can't do what I want them to do. What God wants them to do, I'm sorry. Yeah, they can't do what God wants them to do. So it's very important that as fathers, we give our children courage to step out of the house and step out into life and to do what they feel God's called them to do, even if it's not easy for us to deal with, right? All right.